need to do during the day. And if we took out occupational and looked at activity, I mean, if there's something that in the word, the verbiage we use that comes down from the medical model, we might want to just like toss that out and, you know, talk about things with a different paradigm.
So 6 or 7 years ago, we did a focus group. We had a marketing director at the N.A.I.L.P, and we brought some seniors together and asked them how did they like assistive technology and what would they rather hear. And they said, well, I wouldn't buy assistive technology, but I'd buy a gadget. I'd buy a gizmo. Okay. So when we changed the names of some of our presentations to assistive technology for mobility to gadgets that get you around, we went from 5 or 6 people in the room to a packed room.
Exactly.
So I don't know if there are certain words, you know, for the senior population, general senior population, they like gadgets, they like gizmos. Those words they resonated. Are there certain words that might work better? Yeah.
Well, I teach sociology and psychology at the local community college up in Yukon. And one of the first things I do is teach terminology, you know, and so it's not so much whether or not what's your favorite word. It's more like, this is what this word is and this is what it means.
Yeah.
And so you want to teach them what these words are and what they're related to and how it's used. And once you broaden their vocabulary to include assistive technology devices, they'll tell you exactly what they mean.
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I mean,
that's my assumption.
Yeah, and perhaps, you know, with students that makes sense. But I do think, because I teach too, and with my students I do the same thing. But words carry connotations to people, and there's emotional meaning. And for some, it's like, I don't know your name. What's your name, sir?
Greg.
Greg. Thank you, Greg. Greg was saying, you know, technology. I won't touch it. I don't want to touch it. Right? He called it the machine. So is there an emotion, I'm just wondering, I don't know, is there an emotional reaction to, do you think possibly assistive technology? If not, then we can move forward and call it assistive technology. If you think there might be a better term, even if you don't know what it is today, if you want us to explore other ways of talking about it, then we can. I just want to make sure that we're not walking into a community and saying, hey, assistive technology, and people say, oh, no, we don't want that, because it has a negative meaning, right?
For everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's where it comes from.
Some of my experience comes from my mother's reaction to some of the things that went on while she was still alive. And when I was a kid growing up, she had a little thing called the Morris Minor. It was a car, and it got us around at very low speeds. And she could fix it. She could take it apart. She knew how it worked. She did all the maintenance for it. She did all this stuff. And the minute we got to something like a computer where you're not hooked up to anything, we have a wireless system in my home, it went out into the ethers. She couldn't visualize it. She couldn't figure out where to put it. This is my take on it, where to put what was happening so that she could vision, like she did fixing the car. She knew if it went bumpy, bumpy, bump, you did this to it, if it, whatever. But this other stuff is sort of beyond the can, and so she couldn't connect it. And I think that if we had some words that helped with those connectors, and so I like the gadgets and gizmos, because those are things that, in the 40s and 50s, that was a term, I think, that came into sort of like widgets and things like that are kind of, don't know what they are, but we know that people make them. It's just the generational issue. If kids don't bother to wonder what happens in the black box, they just take it for granted and use the heck out of it. But folks who need to know what was happening inside have a greater barrier to just going ahead and using something. So I think vocabulary for a number of reasons is pretty important.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, and I think with the talk on the vocabulary, it's the presentation of the material in itself. Like we don't do it, but the clinic does a community outreach every month, and they invite all the different Indian agencies periodically to come in and talk about the services. And when you go in there and talk, like when I go in there and talk with everybody, if I'm sitting there, I'm not going to be talking like a director of a program. I'm going to be talking like an individual in the community. And so I won't use a lot of the terminology I would use, say, in a room like this. I'll use the terminology that my cousin, who's got 8th grade education and he's 52 years old, he'll use. But also emphasize the importance of what we're talking about and always use humor. You know, especially when you know people that are, you know, kind of there, and you kind of joke with them while you're doing your presentation. And it's, a lot of times it's more acceptable, at least what I've seen with a lot of Native people.
Kim, are you, you talked about doing some web presentations. Have you ever done anything on YouTube? The reason I ask is because I've just started to learn that. It's kind of like watching TV. But if I need to learn how to do something, I just realized I can go probably find 45 different demonstrations of it on YouTube. And it's real easy to do it. We're starting to do it at work, putting some of our stuff on you know, to get the account. But if you could show somebody how this device might work and how neat it really is, that might be a way of demonstrating.
There are some really good YouTube channels on disability, on assistive technology. One of them is called the Disability Activist Channel, and it's updated almost daily with different ways of technology used in the community.
We have two things. One is video success stories that are YouTube videos that are embedded in our website. So if you click on it, it brings you back to YouTube for the success stories. And part of our contract that we'll start putting together this year is called Real World Device Demos. So we're trying to get away from the medical model and show people who actually use the technology and we follow them around for a day. And then we have someone who really likes to edit video. And so he's going to edit it down to a couple of minutes. So someone's like, thinks, oh, I'm thinking of getting a power chair. I have a manual chair. What, you know, or the, so for example, we're thinking of Tony Sauer because he just bought those assistive, I don't know what they're called.
Push assist?
Push assist, and he loves it. So he can talk about the difference between before he had it, when he had it, and then other consumers. So we're still learning.
Yeah, and I'd recommend that you have a way for folks to learn about assistive technology in terms of if there's a conference, that you set some money aside for folks from the community, from the Native American community, to be there. Because as you can see, the word of mouth is a huge way that, you know, that the information travels. So if you set up, I mean, I'd love to see universities set up programs to train folks in assistive technology from Native communities. I mean, that would, because it's that word of mouth process. Once folks, local folks become comfortable with it, that's how it's really going to get spread. So if you want to get penetration, you got to send these folks in to learn what they need to learn so they can bring it back to their communities, because it's going to be very difficult otherwise from someone outside saying this is the best thing since sliced toast. It's just not going to be the same. So provide money.
That's good. So maybe like even just a scholarship, like a super easy scholarship form.
You know, when they used to have the Northridge, you know, assistive tech, why not set some monies aside from folks to go, especially young people who can bring it back, or whoever. But somebody that's local that can say, you know what, this is, if you have money to do that, that's the training factor is going to multiply.
And that's something we can implement fairly quickly. You know, we have to find the money, but I think we could.
Because there's not a lot of money in these communities for folks to go to these training programs. It's really very expensive.
And I'd much rather send somebody from David's community rather than somebody from our agency. I mean, I'd like to send them too, but we know the stuff, we've seen the stuff. I think it would be much nicer to have somebody in the community.
Good idea.
That's a really, I like it because you can implement it immediately. Okay, so.
Along with that, or anything that you decide to implement in talking
with the communities, for me, it's about, and the communities that I've dealt with, it's about the follow-through. If you cannot, you can provide the service, but if you can't provide that follow-through, then that means you haven't met your contract. And a lot of our Native people think in terms of, it's your word. You need to follow through and then come back and check up. All right, if you don't do that, then you're just like everybody else that made a promise.
Yeah.
So you have to, if you're gonna make the promise and you're gonna make the outreach and you're gonna go out there and do all this, then make sure that you set some money aside also to follow up. To go back in 6 months, see what's going on. Make sure that we're walking our talk.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that,
Word of mouth. The word gets around.
Okay, the word gets, that word gets around. And that's the word that's around now, and that's why we're sitting here, because that word's already around.
Yeah. Interesting. So I have one more question, and it really piggybacks the last one. If we were to create a brochure, like a specific brochure for the Native American community that talked about assistive technology and its benefits, how should we describe it? What type of words should we use? I know it's very similar to the last question, but now we're asking for the brochure, something written.
Well, California Rural Indian Health Board is the expert in that. I mean, they've been doing brochures and.
Okay.
that was one.
We always use the team, we get together as a group of people, but we actually hired, when we had photographers at our office that took pictures, but we hired someone to kind of get it out there right. I mean, as far as like the design of it all, another Native American person, but yeah, I just go back to using like pictures of American Indians, like Tanner mentioned.
Yeah.
And showing them with this, people like that they can identify with, and things like that. And just, I'm not sure about the actual terms. That's the part I'm not really that familiar with.
You don't need the term so much if you
So
show
much
it
if you show the
visually.
visual. I think
If
visual
you
is
used a
most
Native
important.
American, like you said, you used a Native American PR person
Right,
or
yeah.
design person. So inherent in that is how to connect instead of, oh, well, I think this will work, and then just do the visual stuff and
And yeah,
not
and
worry
use-
about
Right.
the words.
Using the artwork from the
Yeah.
Community will
California
create
area,
the conversation
different
around it
areas.
if it,
If it attracts them, if they're gonna even pick it up and look at it.
It's very archetypal.
I like it.
These terms aren't,
This is not.
not understandable. and
No.
These words are.
Good for everybody.
Good for us to be honest. I like this. I have to pick on changing the colors, because I mean, it just,
It's PG.
yeah, it doesn't talk to me. Usually, people of color like to see something a little bit more colorful, to kind of grab your eye. This one, it's just, it'll sit in a rack. Oh, well, this is for the powwow. Yeah, so you can see it from down here.
Yeah, you can,
Okay,
you're right.
and that's
You
the
pick
point.
it up.
Okay, this is the Shumash powwow that's happening in October. I was gonna try to wait, but she spied it.
When we're talking about colors, it was.
Yeah, and it kind of grabbed your eye, so, something a little bit more, because I mean, look, which one would you look at first?
Right. No, yeah, the
contest.
black and white photo or the colorful one that pops.
Yeah.
Okay.
And depending on the tribe, some tribes they identify with certain colors.
Yes.
Like my tribe identifies with red, yellow, black, and white. And that's all part of the medicine wheel. And so a lot of times in brochures and stuff, those will be incorporated in there somehow with a design.
Okay. So I will make sure, because I don't know if I got all the feedback there. You said more color to attract attention. You were saying certain colors for certain tribes, that might be a little difficult.
Most
if
tribes
you do more
usually
color.
identify with certain colors.
Okay.
And most communities have their favorite artists also. also?
Yeah, local.
So if you contact a local native artist,